January 8th is not just another date on the calendar. It is a divine appointment. Today you are standing at the doorway of possibilities, and the most powerful declaration you can make is this: Lord, I trust you today. Trust is not a feeling. Trust is a decision. It is the choice to rely on God's wisdom over your understanding, His timing over your impatience, and His ways over your fears. When you say, Lord, I trust you, you are not saying life is easy. You are saying God is greater. Many people want breakthroughs, but they do not want to pass the test of trust. Breakthroughs are not accidents. They are the result of alignment. When your heart aligns with God's will, doors begin to open that no human effort could force open. Trust is the key that fits heaven's locks. Worry never opened a door. Fear never created an opportunity. But trust invites divine intervention into human limitation. Today you must understand this truth. God does not respond to need as much as He responds to faith. Needs are everywhere, but faith is rare. Faith says, even when I don't see the door, I believe God is already turning the handle. Faith says, what looks like delay is actually preparation. When you trust God, you give Him permission to work beyond your logic. And God specializes in doing what logic cannot explain. Some of you are praying for open doors in your careers, your finances, your families, and your spiritual lives. But God is saying, before I open the door around you, I must open something within you. Closed doors often reveal closed minds, wounded hearts, or divided loyalty. Trust purifies your motives. It teaches you to depend on God rather than manipulate people. When trust is complete, resistance loses its power. Understand this clearly. God does not close doors to punish you. He closes doors to protect you. And when He opens a door, no opposition, no background, no mistake from your past can stop it. An open door from God does not need human approval. If God opens it, it will sustain you. If He closes it, it would have destroyed you. Today, make a conscious decision to release control. Control is the enemy of trust. As long as you insist on running your own life, God will allow you to struggle. But the moment you surrender, heaven intervenes. Trust says, Lord, I place my future in your hands. And whatever is placed in God's hands is never wasted. This January 8th, speak this prayer from your spirit. Lord, I trust you with my steps today. I trust you with my unanswered prayers. I trust you with doors that seem shut and pathways I cannot see. I trust you because you see the end from the beginning. And as I trust you, I receive wisdom, courage, and peace. Walk today with confidence. Expect breakthroughs. Look for open doors. Not because you are strong, but because God is faithful. Trust Him and watch what He opens next. Trust is not something that happens to you. It is something you choose. It is a deliberate decision made in the face of uncertainty, pressure, and unanswered questions. Many people think trust appears when circumstances improve, but true trust is revealed when circumstances remain unchanged and your confidence in God stays firm. Trust is not rooted in emotions because emotions rise and fall. Trust is rooted in conviction. It is the quiet assurance that God is faithful even when evidence seems to contradict that belief. When you decide to trust God, you are making a powerful statement about authority. You are acknowledging that God's wisdom surpasses your understanding and that His perspective is higher than your own. This decision removes the burden of trying to figure everything out by yourself. Human reasoning has limits, but divine wisdom has no boundaries. Trust shifts your focus from what you can control to who is ultimately in control. In that shift, peace begins to replace anxiety. Divine intervention does not occur because of desperation. It occurs because of alignment. When trust becomes your posture, heaven is invited into your situation. God responds to faith because faith honors His nature. Faith says, I believe you are who you say you are. When you trust God, you activate spiritual laws that go beyond human effort. Doors begin to open not because you pushed harder, but because you positioned yourself correctly. Trust is not passive. It is an active cooperation with God's will. Many people pray but do not trust. They ask God for help while secretly relying on their own backup plans. Partial trust limits divine involvement. Complete trust removes restrictions. The moment you truly trust God, you stop manipulating outcomes and start receiving direction. Trust allows God to work in ways that preserve your integrity and protect your future. It keeps you from forcing doors that look promising but lead to regret. Trust also builds spiritual maturity. It trains your heart to wait without complaining and to obey without understanding. Waiting is not wasted time when it is filled with trust. In waiting, your character is refined, your motives are purified, and your dependence on God deepens. God often uses delays to prepare you for the responsibility that comes with the breakthrough you are asking for. Trust keeps you steady during this preparation process. When trust is established, fear loses its authority. Fear thrives in uncertainty, but trust anchors you in truth. Even when outcomes are unclear, trust reassures you that God is working behind the scenes. This confidence invites divine intervention because God is honored when His children rely on Him fully. Trust is the doorway through which heaven enters human circumstances. When you decide to trust God, you don't just change your outlook. You unlock the supernatural involvement of God in your life. Breakthroughs are not random events. They are the result of alignment with God's will. Many people desire change, progress, and open doors, but few are willing to align their lives with the principles that make those breakthroughs possible. Alignment means bringing your thoughts, decisions, habits, and desires into agreement with God's purpose. When alignment is missing, effort increases but results decrease. You may work harder, pray louder, and try more strategies, yet still feel stuck. This is because breakthrough flows from order, not from struggle. Human effort has value, but it has limits. You can push, plan, and prepare, yet there comes a point where no amount of strength can move what God alone must shift. Alignment positions you where God can act on your behalf. When your will agrees with His will, resistance begins to fade. Doors that once required force begin to open naturally. This is because you are no longer fighting the flow of God's design. You are moving with it. Many people mistake activity for obedience. They stay busy, but they are not aligned. Alignment requires listening, humility, and the courage to adjust. Sometimes God does not change your situation because He is trying to change your direction. Breakthrough often begins with correction. It may require letting go of relationships, habits, or plans that feel comfortable but are out of season. Alignment is costly, but misalignment is far more expensive. What you refuse to release can delay what you are praying to receive. When alignment is present, your prayers become focused and effective. You are no longer asking God to bless your plans. You are asking Him to reveal His plans. This shift changes everything. Instead of chasing opportunities, you begin to attract them. Instead of forcing doors, you recognize the ones God has already prepared. Alignment brings clarity, and clarity produces confidence. You move forward, not in haste, but with assurance. God's will is not a mystery meant to frustrate you. It is a purpose meant to fulfill you. Alignment does not remove challenges, but it gives those challenges meaning. Even opposition becomes a tool for growth when you are aligned with God's purpose. Breakthroughs that come through alignment are sustainable. They do not collapse under pressure because they were built on divine order, not human ambition. When you choose alignment over effort, you stop exhausting yourself and start experiencing grace. Grace is God's power working through you to accomplish what you could never achieve alone. Alignment invites grace into your life. It allows God to open doors that match your assignment, not just your desire. True breakthrough is not about getting ahead. It is about getting in position. When you are aligned with God's will, breakthrough becomes inevitable because you are exactly where Heaven can trust you with open doors. Fear and worry are powerful forces, but they are also deeply limited. They consume energy, distort perspective, and create the illusion of control while producing no real progress. Fear is rooted in uncertainty, and worry is fear rehearsed in the mind. Neither has the ability to create opportunity open doors, or bring solutions. They only magnify problems. Faith, on the other hand, is creative. It does not deny reality, but it believes that reality is subject to God's authority. Faith is the language of heaven. When faith speaks, God responds. Fear speaks too, but it only echoes human weakness. Many people wait for fear to disappear before they act, not realizing that faith is what drives fear away. Faith does not wait for perfect conditions. It moves despite imperfect circumstances. This is why faith opens doors that fear can never access. Fear sees obstacles. Faith sees possibilities. Fear focuses on what might go wrong. Faith rests in what God has already promised. Worry often disguises itself as responsibility. People say they are worried because they care, but worry is not care. It is mistrust. It suggests that God is either unable or unwilling to intervene. Faith, however, declares confidence in God's nature. It says, I may not know how, but I know who. This kind of faith releases peace because it transfers the burden from human shoulders to divine hands. When the burden shifts, clarity follows. Faith also requires action. Bell. If without movement is incomplete. When you step forward in faith, even when afraid, you signal your trust in God's guidance. This act of obedience invites divine cooperation. Doors begin to open not because you eliminated fear, but because you refuse to let fear decide your future. God honors courageous faith, not comfortable hesitation. Fear keeps people trapped in familiar environments, even when those environments are unproductive. Faith calls you forward, often into the unknown. But the unknown is only unknown to you, not to God. Every step of faith is taken on ground that God has already prepared. When you trust Him enough to move, He meets you in motion. Faith creates momentum, and momentum attracts opportunity. Worry drains spiritual sensitivity. It fills the mind with noise that makes it difficult to hear God's direction. Faith quiets the heart. It creates space for discernment and wisdom. When fear is silenced, vision becomes clear. You begin to recognize doors you once overlooked because anxiety blinded you. Faith sharpens perception and strengthens resolve. Ultimately, fear and worry are barriers you were never meant to carry. They cannot open doors because they do not come from God. Faith comes from knowing His character and trusting His promises. When faith replaces fear, you don't just feel better, you move forward. And when you move forward in faith, doors respond. Opportunities align, breakthroughs emerge. Faith does what fear never can, it opens the way. Closed doors often feel like rejection, failure, or delay, but in many cases they are evidence of divine protection. Human perspective tends to judge outcomes by immediate comfort or success. But God sees consequences, futures, and hidden dangers that remain invisible to us. When a door closes, it is not always because you are unqualified or undeserving. Sometimes it closes because going through it would have cost you your peace, your purpose, or your integrity. What you call a setback may actually be a rescue. Many people spend years mourning doors God intentionally shut. They replay conversations, revisit decisions, and ask why something didn't work out. Yet if God had allowed certain doors to open, they would have led to exhaustion, compromise, or destruction. Protection is often misunderstood because it doesn't always feel gentle. A closed door can hurt, especially when you invested time, effort, and hope into what was behind it. But pain does not equal punishment. Sometimes pain is proof that God intervened before things became worse. God's wisdom operates beyond emotion. He does not guide your life based on temporary satisfaction, but on eternal purpose. A door may look promising, logical, and even beneficial, yet still be wrong for your assignment. God's refusal is often rooted in His foresight. He sees conflicts you would have encountered, burdens you were not meant to carry, and detours that would have delayed your destiny. Closed doors redirect you, even when you don't understand the redirection at the moment. Protection also preserves identity. Some doors demand compromise as the price of entry. They require you to shrink your values, silence your convictions, or exchange your authenticity for acceptance. God closes such doors because He refuses to let success cost you your soul. Advancement that destroys character is not progress. It is loss disguised as gain. Closed doors guard your integrity when your emotions are tempted to override your discernment. There are seasons when God closes doors to strengthen your dependence on Him. When options disappear, trust must deepen. This is not abandonment, it is refinement. God uses closed doors to teach patience, humility, and discernment. In those moments, you learn to wait, to listen, and to realign. Waiting behind a closed door is often preparation for a greater responsibility ahead. Protection also works in timing. A door closed today may open later when you are ready to handle what lies beyond it. Readiness involves more than skill. It includes maturity, discipline, and wisdom. God does not open doors prematurely because premature access can damage both the gift and the person receiving it. Closed doors slow you down so you don't arrive unprepared. When you begin to see closed doors as protection rather than rejection, your attitude changes. Gratitude replaces resentment. Trust replaces frustration. You stop forcing outcomes and start following direction. Every door God closes, remove. Is a threat you could not see, and every closed door is evidence that God is actively involved in your life, guarding your future with intentional care. Surrendering control is one of the most difficult yet most powerful decisions a person can make. Control gives the illusion of security, but it often produces anxiety, exhaustion, and frustration. When you try to manage every outcome, every detail, and every possible scenario, you place a burden on yourself that was never meant to be carried by human strength. Control competes with trust. As long as you insist on directing your own path, God will allow you to experience the limits of your own ability. True surrender is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the recognition that God's perspective is greater than yours and His timing is more accurate than your urgency. Surrendering control means releasing the need to manipulate situations and people to get the results you want. Manipulation may bring short-term success, but it always produces long-term consequences. God does not bless what you force. He blesses what you yield. When you surrender, you give God the freedom to work without resistance. Control often comes from fear, the fear of loss, failure, or disappointment. But fear cannot coexist with surrender. Surrender says, I trust you even if the outcome is different from my expectation. This level of trust creates space for God's supernatural involvement. When you let go, God steps in. He does not override your will. He responds to your submission. Submission is the doorway to authority. The moment you submit your plans to God, He empowers your steps with divine backing. Open doors require more than effort, they require permission. God will not force open doors in your life if your heart is closed to His guidance. Surrender opens your heart. It makes you teachable, sensitive, and responsive to divine direction. When control is released, clarity increases. You begin to recognize which opportunities are genuine and which are distractions. Surrender sharpens discernment and protects you from running after every option that looks good but leads nowhere. Many people delay their breakthrough because they are unwilling to let go of control. They want God to endorse their decisions rather than lead them. But leadership requires trust. When you surrender, you stop asking God to follow you and start following Him. This shift changes your trajectory. Instead of pushing doors, you begin to walk toward doors that open naturally. God prepares environments in advance for those who trust Him enough to obey. Surrender also produces peace. Peace is not the absence of challenges. It is the presence of confidence in God's leadership. When you are surrendered, uncertainty no longer threatens you. You may not know what is next, but you know who is guiding you. This assurance strengthens patience and fuels endurance. Open doors that come through surrender are sustainable. They do not collapse under pressure because they are supported by God's grace. When you release control, you position yourself where heaven can intervene. Surrender does not limit your life, it unlocks it. Trusting God with today is one of the most powerful spiritual decisions you can make because today is the only space where obedience actually happens. Many people place their faith in tomorrow, believing that someday they will trust God more fully, serve more faithfully, or live more purposefully. But faith that is postponed is faith that is powerless. God operates in the present. When you trust Him with today, you invite Him to take responsibility for what you cannot yet see. Tomorrow often feels overwhelming because it carries unanswered questions, uncertain outcomes, and invisible challenges. But God never asks you to manage tomorrow. He asks you to obey today. Trusting God with today means committing your thoughts, decisions, words, and actions into His hands right now. It is in this daily surrender that God begins to shape the future. The future is not built by anxiety about what's coming. It is formed by faithful obedience in the present. When you trust God with today, you release the pressure of trying to predict outcomes. Prediction is exhausting because it requires knowledge you do not possess. God already knows what tomorrow holds, and when you trust Him with today, you acknowledge His authority over time. This trust allows God to intervene in ways that protect, prepare, and position you without your awareness. While you focus on obedience, God handles outcomes. Many people struggle with peace because they are trying to carry responsibilities that belong to God. Worrying about tomorrow is an attempt to control the future. Trusting God with today transfers ownership of tomorrow into His hands. This transfer produces rest, not passivity, but confidence. You work diligently today without fear because you believe God is faithful enough to handle what comes next. Trusting God with today also sharpens spiritual clarity. When your mind is consumed with future concerns, it becomes difficult to hear God's voice. Today is where His instructions are clearest. Obedience today positions you to receive guidance for tomorrow. Each step of trust reveals the next step of direction. God rarely gives full visibility because full visibility would eliminate the need for trust. He gives enough light for today so that dependence remains constant. When you trust God with today, you also give Him permission to shape your character. Today's choices form tomorrow's capacity. Patience, discipline, humility, and faithfulness are there, enveloped in ordinary moments of obedience. God builds your future by refining who you are today. This is why rushing ahead can be dangerous. Trust slows you down enough for God to strengthen you internally before advancing you externally. God takes responsibility for tomorrow when He sees your faithfulness today. This does not mean tomorrow will be without challenges, but it does mean you will not face those challenges alone. Trust invites divine covering, provision, and wisdom. What you place in God's hands is managed by His power, not your strength. When you wake up and trust God with today, you are declaring that your future is secure, not because you control it, but because God does.